So we are going to be talking about innovation and complexity. So complexity is something that readily springs to mind when we think of a local government. It is a hideously complex place to try and do any innovation. The innovation part isn't something that springs readily to mind when we talk of local government. Usually it's associated with fast-moving industries, kind of startups, well-funded, etc., which is anything very different in local government. However, from a local government perspective, our remit is to deliver the best possible service to our residents and our businesses. And the reality is that we can't possibly do that with the kind of technologies we've got in place, with the working practices we've got in place, and with the mindsets. And I don't mean that negatively, it's just that mostly what local government does with limited resource is really tries to deliver the best frontline service it can with the resources it's got. Nevertheless, looking kind of ahead the next kind of 2-3 years, it's quite evident that unless we do some radical transformations, we are not going to have a functional public sector. And so innovation, despite the complexity, is something that we absolutely have to get to grips with. What we're going to be talking about is some of the complexities we've got and some of the ways we've found to start dealing with that. I want to start off with a kind of high-level view. It's kind of a summary view of how local government actually works in practice. And first, I'm going to put my glasses on, I can't see what I'm looking at. Essentially, our challenges start at the very beginning with residents. Residents are the people who elect their councillors, or elected members, as we call them, within public sector. Elected members, therefore, have two very precise kind of remits, or two very precise viewpoints, really. One is to look after the residents and to deliver the service that they promise those residents. After all, the residents have voted them into place. But the other one is most councillors across the whole of the UK, and with each of local authority, they have a specific portfolio. So we have a councillor who has a portfolio for AI, innovation, emerging tech, and it's his role to make sure the council officers are fully aware of the opportunities that are delivered from new technology, and to make sure that they give it adequate space in terms of discussing how we embrace it, how we adopt it, where it lies in the priorities as well, and it's their job to do that. So essentially, those two are in conflict. On one hand, they need to spend money on frontline services. The second thing is that it is the leader of the council who appoints the CEO. So there's a lot of tension in terms of decision making. The residents expect the council to deliver services, and the leader expects the council to work within its kind of financial limits and its boundaries. So those are the problems we have to deal with. Other things that really matter is if we look in the middle there, we've got a set of services. So councils provide a lot of services. They're all very complex. The most important thing about that is that when you look at them, there is nothing unifying about those services at all. So the planning department, who look after planning and all of the rules and regulations around that, very little to do with kind of education or licensing roads and highways. The only unifying thing, if there is one, is the fact that every single one of those systems has customer or resident data in it. So when we try to provide a joint up great service, we're having to navigate all of those different service areas. And the other thing is that within those services, each one of those services is typically underpinned by a different vendor. Again, nothing unifying within each of the vendors. There aren't vendors who kind of offer services or technology across that entire stack. So we end up having lots of different vendors, and a lot of the key vendors in things like roads, highways, licensing, waste management, they've been in the market for 30 years. There's no incentive to innovate. They don't do anything outside of public sector. If you've got half of the UK market, and you've got an income from that, you don't actually have to do much to retain customers. So with all of that, we still have to find a way to innovate. The one thing I would say, maybe as a technologist, is that wherever you look in local government, and we've got a list of all the service types that we provide, it's a high-level list, and there's a lot more than that. There isn't anywhere where I can look and say we can't get value from technology innovation. We can't get value from AI. We've spent the last 2 years, 2.5 years, kind of doing lots of proof of concepts and minimal viable products to show that in each one of those areas, these are the type of applications that we can benefit from. They do deliver value. They do help us to save money. They do help us to make a little bit more efficiency, but it's only ever going to do that if we can scale. And on the right-hand side, I'm kind of using innovation and AI interchangeably here. On the right-hand side, we have a list of the types of artificial intelligence that we've worked with or that we know we can work with. And, from a summary point of view, predictive analytics, kind of ChatGPT, natural language processing, machine learning. These are all things that we have done in various services, not only ourselves within the borough that I work in, Kensington, Chelsea, but within colleagues who work in other boroughs with some collaboration. So we know there's use cases where we can kind of make value and we can do what we need to do, which is introduce new technology, be more efficient, be more effective, and save money in the process. However, actually, before I do the however part, this is kind of a slightly deeper dive in one of those examples. So this is environment and sustainability, a lot of discussion around environment. Looking at this particular image, one thing I would say is that environment and sustainability is an area where it is very data and information rich in terms of unstructured information. So there are a lot of regulations, a lot of policies, a lot of research. And what we have is policy teams spending hours and hours and hours each week looking at the policies, looking at the research, working out what our response should be, how we deliver our environment and sustainability goals and our ESG targets and so on, which are all mandated to do. And what we've been able to show them is, look, we can use ChatGPT, we can use large language models to effectively take do some of the heavy lifting, kind of read through the documents, summarize documents, and produce summaries of a whole range of documents so that the policy team can focus on high-level information while they're kind of working through drafting policy. More recently, we've done some more work in that area, so we've built a retrieval augmented generation to show how we can kind of remove hallucination. And we've got working with, obviously, core regulation, core legal documents, but a very well-curated content set so that we know that every piece of information we're looking at when we do the searches are relevant and for the task, and not likely to have hallucination and kind of content that's not relevant. One of the things that policy developers do need to do when they're developing policies, we need to do community engagement. So that's another mandate from government. We can't do anything that impacts the community without reaching out to the community and asking them what they think. Typically, that would involve the policy team writing a draft policy, generating questionnaires, going out to a community and asking questions, and over a period of 2-3 months, gathering all of the data and finding out what their thoughts are. Now we've been working with sentiment analysis. So as we've drafted a policy, we can simply ask residents free format questions. They can send us kind of emails, they can send us a video, they can send us a letter, they can call us on the phone. As long as we can transcribe that information and turn it into digital content, we can build models that do the sentiment analysis. And the most important thing about that is we can do that in real time. We don't have to wait, kind of 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever it is, to get to the end of a consultation process to understand what the general sentiment is. So while the information's coming in from sentiment analysis, we can still be working on the policy. Down in the bottom left-hand side, this is kind of the data-rich part of it. In terms of environment, in terms of sustainability, we need a lot of data. We need to understand how the built environment works. We've got sensors everywhere, kind of CCTV cameras. We've got monitoring air and pollution and traffic and all sorts of things. We can make a lot more use of that data. And we've shown how we can take that data, we can build machine learning algorithms, and we can start to identify patterns in the built environment in terms of how it's working. We've shown how we can kind of extrapolate that and predict where our built environment might go in terms of some of the key parameters we look at. So that information is useful to the various teams that need to work on it. So the economic development team can work out where they need to focus in terms of working partners to develop the environment, whether that is getting money for building new roads, or better highways, or whether it's for building highways, cycle lanes, etc. Other teams that use that information, resilience committee, where we look at the structure and we look at the decay of built environment over a period of time, so we can predict where we need to start thinking about reinvesting and reinvigorating our infrastructure and so on. So that's kind of where we can look to find value. And generally within the council, the council officers, the councillors, they kind of understand this and think, yes, okay. However, our route to getting that value is really quite complex. Try to simplify that and put it into kind of 4 themes. And so this is something I have to think about every day. My teams have to think about every day. It doesn't matter how good an idea we've got. It doesn't matter how kind of well thought through things are. These are things we have to talk about. On the technology front, I'm not going to go through all of these, but on the technology front, a big thing for us is we've got a lot of legacy systems. As I said earlier, a lot of legacies because we've got a small number of well-established vendors, and they don't have to do much necessarily to kind of build out their systems. So when we have vendors, and we'll say to them, can we have an API? Can we have access to your data model? And they would say, no, we can't, because their systems aren't geared up to do it, which means you've got your data locked into systems, you can't extract them, there is very little you can do. In legislative kind of block, public procurement is a big issue for us. Once you start getting to the point where you are having to invest maybe, not much actually, about 100k or more, it has to go to committee, and there's all various stages you have to go through. And typically when you're thinking about innovation, you're trying to do things in, kind of from idea to proof of concept, minimum viable value in a matter of months. With us, typically it is, kind of 3 months. Sometimes procurements take 6 months, only because of the way it's done, the way we have to kind of reach out to the market, the way we have to consider all of the bids that come in, the way we have to give potential vendors the opportunity to question and go back and forth. It just takes forever. Organizationally, I think the biggest issue we face is funding, resource and allocation. That goes back to the issue of the members that have been elected. So typically, when we're making funding decisions, when we're allocating money to various projects, you have all of the members in a room with their portfolios, and each one will pitch what they think they need to spend money on. And alongside that, you've got the heads of services, of all of the directors of services also pitching. So when we do funding, resource and allocation, we're not actually talking about comparing one tech project to another tech project. We may be, say, comparing an innovation tech project to increasing the number of staff in social services, or spending money on temporary housing. So it makes it very difficult to get consensus, which is one of the things in the last block about stakeholder engagement, building internal consensus. And the more you want to do, the more innovation, the more risk, the more money we want to spend, the building internal consensus is a thing we have to try and achieve quickly, but that happens to be the most difficult thing to do. I tried to show some causality between some of those. If I did it completely, it would be a spider's web, but just reading through that, because of the legacy systems we have, we need to spend a lot of time doing procurement to work out how we can build instability, resilience, how we can keep relationships with the legacy providers, yet at the same time try and buy new technology and have the two working side by side. Procurement itself is impacted considerably by the partner landscape. As I said earlier, for some of the areas that we have to work in, very few suppliers, zero competition, but yeah, every time we go to tender, we have to ask for things like innovation and openness, and they all say yes, and we know they can't deliver it, but that's a big part of the problem, because as I said, nowhere else to go. And then the last thing, kind of member objectives versus operations. So the members, as I said, have two perspectives. They look after their constituents who voted them in. In my borough, for example, constituents, a member in the south of the borough, they will deal with things like residents saying, well, I need more parking. Why can't I have 4 or 5 parking spots, because they all live in South Kensington and they've got cars all over the place. In the north of the borough, where unfortunately we had Grenfell, the thing there is about affordable housing, I suppose security, better quality roads and so on, things like that. So you'll have 2 members in the same council with very different opinions and very different views as how money should be spent, and of course they've got their own portfolio. So again, sometimes it's political decisions, sometimes it's operational. However, what we have found, this isn't working, yes it is. What we have found and what works for us, and what has been working over the last couple of years, is what it boils down to is these three things. In terms of removing some of the tension around where money should be spent and how it should be prioritized, it's all about providing a detailed data so we can do data-driven decisions. The way we're doing that is we are looking at all of the council processes. I've gone out to all the heads of services and said, look, what I need to understand is all the end-to-end workflows you've got. What I need to understand is where your biggest pain points are, where things are breaking for you, where things are taking too long, where they're too expensive. So we're doing process modeling. And for each step in the process, we are collecting quite detailed data. So we are collecting data on who's involved, kind of what work is involved, how long things take. If somebody takes, I don't know, has to send 3 or 4 emails, we will know that. If it takes X amount of time to draft a letter or a response to a resident, we've captured all that information. We're also capturing information in terms of the technology, applications, the data that is used to model those process or drive those process. And at the end of it, what we're able to say is a particular process end-to-end costs this amount of money, it takes this amount of time. We know where the bottlenecks are, we know where the breakpoints are. The whole point is that we can then simulate that. We can try different configurations without actually building out the services. We can say, okay, particular part of the process, supposing we take out a piece of technology and we put in new technology, supposing we outsource that whole process to a company, for example, and then we can say, we start off with a particular process. These are the 3 or 4 options for moving that process forward or getting our efficiency, our effectiveness of savings. And we can sit in a room with all the decision makers, we can show them data, and it's a much better conversation because all of the councils, all the decision makers can see the data. So that's the first thing we do. Second thing is on the left-hand side there is the ADCAR. So one of the things I have done, I've introduced my whole team to some methodology we've been using for quite a while. It's ProSci ADCAR. It's a change management methodology. It doesn't focus on top-down corporate change. It's all about bottom-up change. So the idea here is to kind of work with colleagues in the services, people who are delivering frontline services, people who are supporting frontline services. And what we're trying to do is trying to identify with them the kind of issues they're having around adopting new technology. Because part of the problem of the culture is people are so used to technology they've been using for 10, 15, 20 years. You show them something that is new, it's just totally different. And the mindset that is required to effectively let go of the past and move forward, because it's not gradual now, it's kind of a technology leap, is quite tough. So with the methodology, we are working bottom up. We're going to individuals, we're going to small groups, and we're saying, for example, you spend all this time kind of rifling through emails. So what we're going to do is we're going to put Copilot Studio on your inboxes, and it is that piece of technology that's going to read through the emails, it will summarize the emails, it will draft responses for you. All you have to do is kind of look through the responses, make sure you're happy, and then they'll go. But what you don't have to do is kind of come into the office, panic because you've got 20, 30, 40 emails that you have to respond to, read each one, respond to each one manually. So it's at that level we are asking people to, basically working to identify the issues, working to identify people who are happy to change, people who are not happy to change, and we're putting in place training and I suppose other things, other policies and other approaches to try and encourage people along. And then at the top, we're talking to the senior management teams about what we need to do more of that investment in people's time so that it can actually be ready to adopt these new technology. And the last thing, this is a specific example, is around frameworks. What we need to do is make it easier for all stakeholders to come to a conclusion in a room. So typically I'll have head of social services come to me and say, well, I've been talking to this company, we've got a piece of AI technology that will help with my case management. With my case management. And we'll talk to the head of social services, we'll talk to the AI company, and we'll think, yeah, but it's just a small part of what we need to do. Going back to the picture I showed earlier, in order to get value, we need to implement different types of AI technology, and they have to be connected. We can't just put in piece of technology here, there, and everywhere because it's easy for people to use, because it doesn't connect the dots, and will probably create more problems than we would. Anyway, the thing about the AI framework, which I'll talk about now, is that this is our framework on a page. There's a lot of detail behind this. But what it does do, it does enable us to have the conversation. So, for example, we're always talking to senior management team about the AI policies. That's what everybody wants to start with. It used to be, what's our policy in ChatGPT? What's our policy in AI? It is now what is our policy. So when we're talking to people, we can talk through common policies, everything the council should adopt, anyone who wants to put AI in. Additional policies, for example, are basically aimed at directors of services, heads of services who want a bit more assurance. Specific example, I always use this example, is head of social services might say, well, like, I'm happy in concept with the kind of AI technologies, or you're kind of expecting me or you want me to use, but actually I want more kind of people oversight. I want more human in the loop, and that might be their specific policy, which is additive to the common policy. But because we have all these services which aren't specifically connected, it allows each service to kind of add to make them more comfortable in terms of adopting it. The other thing that's worth calling out is project readiness. Our director of service will say to me, okay, we've worked with the company, we're ready to go, we've got a project. First thing I'll do is, okay, let's have a look at your project readiness. There's a big checklist behind that. I'm not going to go through a checklist, but one of the very first things I ask is, have you spoken to my head of data? Have they looked at data quality? Do we know whether it's biased or not? If they haven't, you're not doing this project. It's that sort of thing, because at the service level, the business level, they don't take that into account. Last thing that's worth looking at on this particular slide is the governance. Have spent a lot of time trying to get kind of high-level, top-down governance. It's taken about a year, but that particular piece of governance is around the corporate wrapper around everything else we do. It talks about roles and responsibilities, who the decision makers are, who the advisors are. So we'll have advisors who advise on ethics, for example, and we'll have other advisors who advise on risk, not part of the AI ecosystem, but we'll do that. And then obviously there's a big thing around benefits tracking. This stuff is hideously expensive, whatever anyone thinks. It's all in the cloud. It's all kind of API consumption, and if we're not careful, the costs rocket. We've seen that. So the idea is to make sure that we're not just implementing technology because it can deliver the savings, unless we know that the benefit is going to far outweigh the cost. And then going into the future, there's this whole notion about kind of sustainability, supportability, which is a whole different subject entirely. So I've got a couple of minutes left. I'll take some questions in a second, but some final thoughts from me, really. One is, I think I've shown that within local government, it's actually quite easy to identify a potential use case if you set aside at least the cost and the issues that we have to go through. We know that adoption at scale is going to be difficult, and that is to do with the cost of getting the right people and being able to spend the money on that sort of thing. The last thing is about the impact on the workforce. We talk a lot about it. I know across the UK, unions are talking about how AI is going to displace people from their jobs. And a lot of people say it won't. It absolutely will. People need to be ready for that. But actually, for me, the most important thing is more to do with corporate resilience. So when I talk with our resilience team, I'm really more focused on, if we go down this route and we can deliver AI and we can sustain it and we can operate it, you're going to have more and more people in frontline service, less and less people in frontline services, less and less people with that expertise. So what happens when the AI starts going wrong? One, models start to drift, when they start throwing out incorrect results. You have to turn it off, but we have nowhere to go back to, because unlike the previous eras, we don't have loads of people who can suddenly come into the office and do work. You end up having no service, and what we don't have is teams of data scientists ready to unpick the models, build new models, train them and test them, and that is where we've got to.